Briar, Stewart.
Alex.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Finland's President Alexander Stubb. He's the leader of one of NATO's newest members, a golf buddy to Donald Trump, a wary neighbor to Russia, and a vocal advocate for Ukraine.
You have Russia ramping up attacks on cities. More civilians being killed, highest number of drones being launched. And Putin is not at all interested in a ceasefire, let alone a peace deal. So where does this go?
We're coming, to a point where everyone understands that we have to end this war. You see, the collateral damage of this war is mind-blowing in my mind. If this is a stalemate, if it's a war of attrition, how long can we allow it to continue? And we have to find the tools and instruments to end this war. And the only thing that Russia understands, and especially Putin understands, is power.
It was Russia's invasion of Ukraine that drove Finland to abandon its neutral status and officially join NATO in 2023. Finland's border with Russia is more than 1,300 kilometers long, and Moscow is currently bolstering its military sites along what is now NATO's northeastern flank.
Ukraine is not only fighting for its own independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is very much a fight about the world order that we exist in. It's about international institutions, rules and norms. I mean, if we throw them out, then what is left? If we live in a world where might is right, where a bigger player can basically do the acquisition of territory, then we live in a lawless world.
And I had read that after President Trump met with Volodymyr Zelensky at the Vatican earlier this spring, you had said that you were more optimistic about the potential for ceasefire negotiations. Yeah. I'm wondering how you feel now.
Well, it goes in waves, It's almost like one week I'm optimistic, another week I'm pessimistic. Right now, I'm quite pessimistic that we'll reach a ceasefire before the end of the summer. There doesn't seem to be a momentum. And of course, we're talking about a few thousand soldiers and civilians dead per week. And remember that what the Russians are doing, they are killing civilians. They're hitting civilian targets. So we need to come to a ceasefire. But again, after the NATO summit, I was more optimistic of where we're going, but I wasn't optimistic about an imminent ceasefire. So I think we're going to have to grind this out, unfortunately, this summer and see how it moves into the fall.
And I want to ask you about just sanctions on Russia. I mean, you and others, certainly plenty of others, have been calling for them to be toughened because despite multiple rounds, Russia is still managing. Its economy is struggling, but it's managing, right? It's able to keep funding its war for now. And what is it that you would like to see happen? I mean, what do you think really tilts this? Yeah,
well, go full Monty. I mean, that's my sort of answer to it. So, if you want to end this war, you need to do two things. One is you need to continue to militarize Ukraine. And the second thing, we need to put pressure on Russia so that it ends the war. It doesn't have an incentive to continue anymore.
The European Union is poised to approve its 18th package of sanctions against Russia. And in the US, a bipartisan group of senators is pushing for a bill that would roll out a 500% tariff on countries that import Russian products like oil. If passed, it would mean India and China will pay a heavy price. Trump says he's considering it.
We get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth.
But it's hard to keep track of his ever-shifting tone on Ukraine.
What you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country.
In the past week, weapons have been diverted and then promised once again.
We're going to send some more weapons. We have to.
On several occasions, U.S. officials have threatened to walk away from peace talks altogether.
There's been signs that the White House might be losing patience with this process. What happens if Donald Trump and the White House lose interest in this?
Losing interest, I think, is a big word. Everything is linked to everything in international relations right now because we live in a very transactional world. So what we saw the US doing in Iran might have a ramification of what's going on in Ukraine. We don't know. How will it have a ramification? The first thing is President Trump showed that he's willing to use force and power to get his way. Second thing, Iran is now weakened and cannot provide ammunition and missiles anymore to Russia. So will this then trigger Trump to be tougher on Russia? We simply don't know. But I do think that President Trump holds the key in getting peace here.
Trump's presence looms large over NATO, including at last month's summit at The Hague. He's been credited with pushing members to at least agree to hike defense spending to 5% of GDP. In a world where all foreign leaders are trying to figure out how to manage Trump, Stubb has been able to connect with him.
How would you describe the relationship that you have with him?
It's very important for a president of a small country to get along with the president of a big country. And I have to admit that in Finnish history it's quite rare that the Finnish president has spent so much time with the president of the United States, either physically or on the phone or messaging. The takeaway that I have from it all is that you have to deal with foreign policy as the world is, not as you wish it would be. And the reality is that the United States has elected its 47th president in the form of Donald Trump, whose foreign policy is quite transactional. And then you have to deal with that. Then you have to think, okay, how do I influence? How do I have an impact?
Do you feel like you have Trump's ear at all?
In diplomacy, you never want to inflate your relationship. For me, diplomacy is about two things. It's state-to-state relations. I'm very transatlantic. When I was a kid, I spent summers in the US and in Canada. And I studied in the US. So my heart is in North America quite often. But the other relationship that you have in diplomacy is personal, because it's human beings that take these decisions.
So what does he think about Trump repeatedly declaring that the United States needs to take control over Greenland?
We need Greenland. We have to have Greenland.
In order to beef up security across the Arctic.
During the Cold War, the US had over 20 bases, military bases in Greenland. And there's nothing that stops them from having them today. So this should by no means be a question of territorial acquisition. Quite the opposite. It should be a question of investing into Greenland and have the Greenlanders decide on their own future. And their own future is in their hands. Right now it's very much part of Denmark and will be probably for the foreseeable future. Then we need to have them as part of the whole Arctic game. They're a very important part of it, strategically and otherwise.
So potentially more US bases, more infrastructure on the ground, but not more control.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what we're probably looking at. And the Danes have been really good on this. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has had good conversations, good diplomacy, and I think we just need to take it step by step and calm things down. I think that's quite often important in diplomacy.
In an effort to boost security and respond to a warming climate, the US, Finland, and Canada signed an agreement designed to ramp up the production of icebreakers. Finland is a world leader in building these ships. In August at this shipyard, construction will start on a new icebreaker for the Canadian Coast Guard, which will be jointly built in Quebec.
Russia has over 40 icebreakers, and Finland builds 60% of the world's icebreakers. We design 80% of the world's icebreaker, and we can churn them out in somewhere between 2 to 3 years. And we need to move fast. I think the alliance needs north of 40 icebreakers for itself, and that of course includes the US, Canada, Finland, and many others.
So besides the icebreaker pact, are there other areas where you see Canada and Finland being able to cooperate?
Well, we're rivals in ice hockey, that's the key to know. But no, I do think that there are many different areas. Canada probably now needs to hike up its defense expenditure because we have a 5% target in NATO, and Finland has a very strong and vibrant defense industry. I've always felt, and not only because I have an ice hockey background, that Canada and Finland are pretty much hip to hip. We're very similar countries, similar mentality, similar nature, similar industry as well.
And you mentioned you had kind of lengthy conversations, I guess, with Prime Minister Carney at The Hague. What were your impressions of him and kind of where Canada stands, particularly with that 5% target?
Well, we didn't talk about the 5% target. We talked more about NATO, defense cooperation, the transatlantic partnership. We talked about the ice pact, and nothing. What can go wrong when you've been a goalie at Harvard? for the ice hockey team. So, you know, we hit it off really well with Prime Minister Carney, and I'm sure that the cooperation between Finland and Canada will continue.
And I'm wondering what advice you would have, or Finland would have, for Canada living next to a very dominant country.
Just continue to work with the Americans as allies and as friends. And you know, I've always said that, you know, you should never get flustered. You know, stay cool, calm, and collected. If sometimes, you know, language seems a bit on the rough side, take an ice bath and a sauna, that helps.
In Canada, we say elbows up now. Is there a Finnish equivalent?
Say what?
Elbows up, right?
Elbows
they do
up.
it like Gordie Howe
yeah,
hockey. They say elbows
up is fine, but I still think that they fight too much in the rink in the NHL. So, but keep the elbows up, but smile at the same time.
Maybe head for the sauna.
Head for the sauna and the ice bath.